Hey, good morning. It's January 10th, 2018, and we're going to continue on some of the comments because they have a lot of good, interesting points relating to Mormonism in the last few days. Not that they don't other times, but we've had a lot of good comments, so I'm kind of continuing on where we left off yesterday along those lines. All right, well, we'll just start with this quickie right here. Yesterday's broadcast I thought was pretty good. Although I'll give a warning at 8 minutes and 7 seconds. I kind of slipped there, dropped an F-bomb. So that's something you need to be careful of. 8 minutes and 7 seconds. Turn it off a couple seconds before that for about 5 seconds. Okay, so hey Dodger, please just give the facts, not your conclusions. This is free person. Might be the first comment anyway. Thanks. I do think it's my right to think and opine occasionally. Even if people believe in God, they believe that God gave them a brain that they're supposed to think. We've just been told by LDS leaders like Dallin Oaks that we can turn that thinking off essentially when it comes to things that might be testimony challenging. Then we need to rely on the Spirit, and if we're faithful, the Lord will tell us through the Spirit that things are true, even if they contradict the facts. But if you don't like opinions or conclusions, you don't have to accept them. But sometimes I do give those in addition to something just printed off LDS.org. I think it's my right to think, and it's your right to accept or reject any conclusions I might have. Thanks for your sharing there. All right, next we got the Jedi. And he's taking exception to something Perry Chronicle says. So let's see. Because they can sell it to the people like they do, the sheeple by the first vision, hook, line, purchase the sheep will buy into the first vision, hook, line, and sinker. So Jedi, what's he gonna say? Here's what really happens. Millions of LDS today are put Moroni's promise to the test. Found in Moroni 10, 4, and 5. I usually like to look back at Moroni chapter 10, verse 3. But let's continue on what Jedi says. He says, either what I'm telling you is true, or you believe that God is not powerful enough to witness the truth to someone in a manner that they know exactly who the witness is coming from. Have a good one. Okay, so I've touched on this before, but that's okay. Jedi likes to keep pasting this particular assertion up, which is that he tends to tell us that the witness of what he calls the Spirit is more valid than anything else. And I take exception to this because the Spirit can witness. You can get a good feeling whether it's from emotionally stimulated, psychologically induced, or by a spiritual entity, which Jedi seems to think if it's witnessing that the Book of Mormon is truthful, or that the Doctrine and Covenants is truthful, or that Joseph Smith was a true prophet of the God of Israel, and that the God of Israel is real, then, that comes from a reliable source. And that's kind of what I think Jedi is getting at. And many of us in the LDS Church and in other churches have had those type of spiritual experiences that are things that we would say are not emotionally or psychologically induced. And so what I found is that if these spiritual entities, which he calls the Holy Spirit or from God, can witness to contradictory statements, then they cannot be relied upon to be honest or truthful. We find Joseph Smith contradicting himself sometimes in the next verse, both in the Doctrine and Covenants and in the Book of Mormon. I'll just give a couple examples of that. So, first Where am I here? First Nephi, Second Nephi chapter 5. Good grief, what's happening to my brain? Second Nephi chapter 5, verses 15 and 16 is a nice little example of the very next verse. In verse 15, if you read it, he'll say that it's supposedly, the character Nephi talking and saying, hey, we had all these great, riches and things, gold and silver and precious ores. He says, and precious ores after he said gold and silver, by the way, as if there's something more precious. What, did they have platinum? And the very next verse, verse 16, he said, so we decided to make this temple like unto this temple of Solomon. But we couldn't make it, out of all these precious things because there basically weren't any, even though there were in the previous verse. So, there's an example of he contradicts himself in the very, very next verse. Another spot's in section 76 of the Doctrine and Covenants, and I don't know the verse offhand, but he's talking about all creation coming through Jesus Christ. And he mentions, the only begotten Son. He says, and he is the only begotten of the Father. The only begotten, okay? And the very next verse, he says, through whom the worlds were made, are and were created. I think is the language. And then and then he says, and the inhabitants thereof are begotten sons and daughters unto God. So he just said that Jesus was the only begotten, or he was referring to him without using a name, And then he says all the space aliens are begotten sons and daughters unto God. Read it. Yeah. That's just in the next verse. Contradicting himself, Book of Ether, chapter 3, verse 15, goes on to say that the brother of Jared's the first guy to ever see the Lord, whoever the Lord is. The Lord in that case is both the Father and the Son, because he's all into this, modalism and Trinitarianism style stuff where God, the Father, and Jesus are one and the same person. But he says he's the only guy that's ever seen him, the first guy to ever have enough faith. And this is, running along timeline of about 2200 BC. So it's about 1,000 years after the fact that we find in the inspired version of the Bible, Genesis chapter 7, which goes as Moses chapter 7 in the Pearl of Great Price, where he's doing the same thing with Enoch, about 1,000 years prior to that, long, long before the mythical flood of Noah, saying, he says, I'm the Lord spoke to Enoch face to face as one man speaks to another. And then, of course, goes on to say that Enoch built a city and the Lord dwelt there and all this good stuff. So, and Enoch, moved rivers and mountains and that sort of thing. And this is all 1,000 years before he tells brother of Jared he's the first guy to ever see him and first guy to have enough faith. Moving mountains, moving rivers, which is the same thing he says brother Jared does. So, absolute contradiction. They're not in the same book, but they're both, supposedly translated by Joseph Smith through the inspiration of God, the power of God. So, and we also have the word of the Lord in Doctrine and Covenants, section 17, verse 6, speaking of the Book of Mormon, saying, as, the Lord your God liveth, it is true. So, is it true? Well, if it's true, then the other thing's a lie. So, some of it's obvious, contradictory statements like that, they are not both true. This is, like first grade logic, people. So, sorry, Jedi, your God's a source that's completely unreliable. He testifies through his Holy Spirit of things being true that contradict each other, even when Jesus is supposed to have said them. And it's, going straight through his prophet, Joseph Smith. So, that's the problem I have with your Moroni ratification through the spirit of this stuff, because the spirit is a liar, according to our fact checking within Mormonism, within the scriptures given through your Mr. Holy Prophet, who went after other dudes' wives as soon as he could get them off on missions. Okay. Perry Chronicles gonna have some response there to Jedi saying, well, where did we get the angel Moroni from in the first place? Okay, so we were quoting out of, the Book of Moroni and the Book of Mormon. So Perry's going to take a look at the credibility of this. If you go ahead and read the Times and Seasons, which happens to be, it was a church publication published in the time of Joseph Smith, Times and Seasons, Volume 3, pages 749 from 753, you find out that that it was originally Nephi. In other words, the angel Moroni that we hear about in the story was referred to as a messenger sent from the presence of God, and his name was Nephi. That's what we have in the Times and Seasons, and that's what we have also in the Pearl of Great Price. I think it's 1851 edition. Continuing, so says Perry, you can also go to the Millennial Star in August of 1842 and find that it was also stated as Nephi. So tell me exactly how you put the angel Moroni's promise to the test when it was actually the angel Nephi. But wait, I'm going to tell you how we got the angel Moroni. It wasn't until 1878, and Orson Pratt changed it from Nephi to Moroni in the Pearl of Great Price. Yeah, and like I said, like the I think it's 51 edition of the Pearl of Great Price had it as Nephi too. But you wouldn't know this if you did, but you would know this if you did any of your research yourself instead of just following along like you were told. Do I hear MK Ultra, anyone? I think so. Please don't fill me with your nonsensical BS, because you clearly have not done your own research, Jedi. Thank you for your time, and have a good one too, but I guess it's their lie, so they can tell it how they want to. Alright, good points. Yeah, if you look at the original manuscripts there, you will find, just as Perry said, that it does say Nephi, and then there's a line through it, and Moroni wrote it above. It's written as Moroni above, so apparently that changed as far as when it was published in 1878 from the 1851 prior last publication that I think I'm aware of, as well as these 1842-ish publications mentioned. So, what do we have here? Joe Smith says one thing, and, it doesn't really go too well with the story, so Orson Pratt keeps up the tradition. Just keep changing and backdating history to make it look as good as possible. What does that tell us? Well, fingerprints of fraud. All right. So, in other words, where's your credibility? All right. The Now Church, When Pigs Fly. Okay, addressing When Pigs Fly. The Now Church says, hey, When Pigs Fly, you have some good points, but made one wrong assumption. The Supreme Commander with a Baphomet symbol pertains to the Scottish Rite, a rite that a Master Mason can choose to join or not. It is an appendage to Masonry and not Masonry itself. You cannot define all of Freemasonry by Scottish Rite and Albert Pike. Now I'll see if When Pigs Fly responded to that. I'm going to respond to it right now. In fact, I think I did. So I've actually dealt with I've been kind of attacked on Reddit. It was probably in Mormon subreddit by basically Freemason apologists who try to move away from Luciferianism and that sort of thing, despite the fact that Pike wrote about it. And they try to say, they try to contain Albert Pike simply to Scottish Rite, Freemasonry, and so forth. This person does state that the Scottish Rite is an appendage to Masonry and not Masonry itself. I think that might be a little bit semantic, but basic masonry would be the Blue Lodge, which is, your first 3 degrees. So, you got what, entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason. And then after that, you've got these various continuing developments. You've got the Scottish Rite on one hand, or you've got the York Rite, or if you're black, you've got the Prince Hall Rite. And, he can say it's not masonry itself, or it's not the Blue Lodge, but basically all this masonry really derives from the mystery religions. That's the way it looks to me, and probably they got a lot of their stuff preserved through the Rosicrucians and the Templars, the Knights Templar. So I think this seems a little bit on the apologetic side here. And so Albert Pike wasn't just Scottish Rite. Obviously, in order to get that to the Scottish Rite, he already had to have completed the requirements, to be a Master Mason in the Blue Lodge. And he also had many degrees in the York Rite of Freemasonry. And he wrote, when he wrote Morals and Dogma, it wasn't just necessarily about Scottish Rite Freemasonry. It was about mystery religions, magic, alchemy, Christianity. It was from the root from which all these things spring. And in a completely separate work, Albert Pike rewrote, or revamped, redid some of the rituals for the Scottish Rite. And I have read that some portion of that may have had to do with complaints from the York Rite that Scottish Rite was giving away some of their secrets in certain degrees. So we don't confine Albert Pike's knowledge as a Freemason, as a study, as a student of magic and of history, to the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. So that's my clarification on that. And Biggie wants to respond to that. Maybe he did. He knows his stuff. All right. You're right about Joe Smith. This is the Now Church. Stealing ideas from Freemasonry. But you're wrong to define Freemasonry by Albert Pike and the Scottish Rite. Scottish Rite is an appendage. All right, same kind of a thing. By no means dictates what Freemasonry is or does. Just because the Supreme Council, of the Scottish Rite published Albert Pike's work, 860 some page, work called the Morals and Dogma of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, doesn't mean that all the history and everything that he wrote in it is, exclusive to the Scottish Rite. He says, I'm no fan of Scottish Rite Masonry or Pike or co-founder of KKK. It really should be the KKKK. It's actually the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. But it is best to get our facts straight. Peace. Okay, well, the Palladian Rite and Pike's letters to Manzini are frauds. I don't think so. I've read those Masonic apologetics, and I don't agree with that. And no, it's not uninformed. I've actually looked into that. That's Masonic apologetics. It says, it's all the taxi fraud. If you read Morals and Dogma, you can, make your own distinctions there. Don't confine Albert Pike to the Scottish Rite. Sorry, I disagree with that. But that's okay. All right. Southern Boss Lady says, all right. She's so optimistic. I'll look for your website. I know it'll be very enlightening. If I ever need a boost, she's always got something positive to say. Very generous and kind. All right. The Now Church. What evidence do you have about Lucifer and Luciferian being connected to mystery schools of the ancients? You will find that the mystery schools that Freemasonry drew from are ultimately forms of Hermetic doctrine, astrology, and alchemy. Yeah, I put those all together actually, and Pike does, which in turn come from Kemetic deity. Okay, so now you're getting it all from Egypt. Also known as Enoch. The lessons taught in the schools have been used by righteous men and have been abused by unrighteous men, but were first part of God's benefit for humanity. Lucifer and Luciferianism are much later creation and a myth which have no real connection to Tehuti Enoch. Peace. Okay, so I'm not necessarily in agreement with everything the Now Church is opining here. I would say opining. He probably feels it's fact because he's God's benefit for humanity. So that's professing his particular, I'm assuming his, maybe it's a her, but it's maybe a Freemason, abused God's benefit for humanity. Actually, when I look at history, it goes way before God was invented by the Jews, so, or the Egyptians. So I'm not. The Luciferian stuff is all mixed in, and I don't see Luciferian stuff as bad. Actually, I think it's good. I agree with Albert Pike in that, except for he says Lucifer is God, and unfortunately Adonai, or in other words, the Jewish God Yahweh. Adonai just is Hebrew for my Lord, is a reference to Yahweh, and he says he's the evil God of the Jews. So I'm not saying that either one of these entities or asserted to be entities are the good or the bad. Well, Adonai, Yahweh is evil. Let's face it. All I got to do is read the Old Testament. A lot of people try to excuse Yahweh for what he does when he's doing the same thing the other gods do. They're just competing with each other. So it's all brand identity. Yahweh's the good guy and Baal is the bad guy, but they do the same things. They all have people sacrifice, animals and people to them, and they both basically suck. So, sorry, I'm not in agreement, but that's okay. I appreciate your comment. It's okay for you to have your point of view too. All right. Hope some of this is enlightening here. I think these are all good, interesting points here. All right, Perry says, Dodger Game, thank you. I just wanted to be clear on the whole promise deal because he couldn't settle. Okay, so we're talking about, I commented, we don't see my comments in this not quite so nifty software here, but it's better than trying to look at all the, well, I don't want to go to all the videos. It's just too much hassle. All right, on the promise deal. So he's referring to Perry is referring to the credibility of Angel Moroni in the Book of Moroni here. So it says, just want to be clear on the whole promise deal referred to by the Jedi, because he couldn't settle on just one angel. But shoot, they could never lead you astray, or they would be taken out, right? Okay, so that's Mormon doctrine, which is that the prophet of the Lord will never lead us astray, or else God would just get rid of him. That's what we've been told by some of Joseph Smith's successors, so of course we should believe it because, they're such good guys, right? However, the Bible warned us about false prophets, but that excludes those who want many wives or none of his so-called prophecies never coming to pass. Okay, so in other words, Joseph Smith hasn't passed the prophecy test very well in Perry's view, or a lot of people's view, since we have a lot of them that appear to be way overdue or completely falsified. Good point. My favorite is the one when he stated that 56 years would be the winding up scene for the second coming. Yeah, there's a lot of people that note that. Now, it does say 56 years should wind it up, but it doesn't actually define it. It appears that we're talking about the second coming. It does. And I'm pretty sure that's what was being referenced. But it doesn't actually say the second coming, at least if I'm remembering correctly. Well, in that case, we should not be here, because Christ should have already been here. Yeah, pretty much. And we have had plenty of statements by other LDS prophets like Wilford Woodruff, saying there are people still in this room that'll be alive when the Savior returns, and referring to the second coming, and that was a very long time ago. So, unless they're cryogenically preserved or living in Middle Earth, I don't even think the Hunzacuts live that long. But the Bible states that no one knows the hour or the day that the Son of God shall return. Yeah, it does say that. I guess he missed that scripture when reading and translating the Bible. Good point. Yeah, when people do that, when they tell us the day or the hour, and profess to also believe the Bible, then they're contradicting their own source material for this kind of thing. So Jehovah's Witnesses have been really good about that. They've blown so many of those. They've you know they've had the exact day, I think, like 5 times blown it. So it strains credibility just a tad, doesn't it? Good points, Perry. Okay, Percat says Joseph's myth said Nephi, then Moroni, perhaps because he put a seer stone into his old white hat upside down. Or his spirit guides may have confused his mind if he improperly bled a dog or a sheep to death in conjuring up the dead. Or perhaps he abused his St. Peter's bind, them layman, and the conjured spirit, in a fit of pique, lashed out at Joe's mind, confusing momentarily his great mind. Alright, so if this sounds any weird to anybody, we do have, historical reference on Joseph Smith practicing necromancy while doing the treasure seeking. He used the stone, as many people did in his day, to, like a crystal ball, to seek for treasures in the earth, like, Captain Kidd's treasure and that kind of stuff. And there were typically guardian spirits. In other words, if we call them angels, we don't necessarily mean they're good angels. They're usually like people that were murdered or dead pirates or whatever, guarding treasure. And so to appease these demons, they would sacrifice animals to them, usually a black animal. A black sheep would be preferable, or a black goat, but a black dog has been used. And they would, Joseph Smith, their family, they had magic implements. They had a magic knife to draw their magic circles and to slit the throat of the animal, like Jews do on the altars and that sort of a thing, and then walk them around the circle till they bled to death, I believe. And, Hiram had the magic parchment. In fact, he had that on him when he was killed. It's called Holiness to the Lord. So I've shown that in other things. So, yes, he was a necromancer and a magician. Might not have been a very good one, but yeah, he was better at just copycatting other people's stuff and putting a little spin on it and then saying it was his, which we've got with, everything from Emanuel Swedenborg's doctrines to, the Order of Enoch to the Word of Wisdom. Okay, so Percat is referencing some Joseph Smith history here that they don't teach in Sunday school. Or perhaps he abused. All right. So, anyways, basically, he or she, Percat's telling us that, if you play by magic, you live by it, you die by it. Or Joe may have simply screwed up because he had too many lies going on at once that he lost track of his spirit guide stories. Very true. He he did contradict himself a lot, or Nephi and Moroni contradicted themselves and Jesus contradicted himself. However you want to play it, that's what we do have and have documented in a lot of videos going to the sources. All right, Subeam. If you want some real answers, go to askgramps.org. Yeah, I haven't done that in a while, but I have, and there's some good materials there. Thanks, Subeam. Subeam really gives a lot of great references on things. Always pay attention when you see a reference, because Subeam's got some good stuff. Let's see. Subeam says, this video is so sad, I wish she would not talk like that about herself. Okay, that's going to be Hallie Everts. And Hallie seems like a really nice, honest girl. As some of you know, I've done some videos. I started off when who was it? I want to make sure I give credit to the right person. Was it Ron Bryant or no? It was Rams DeReal or something. Realist said, check out her temple video, and she had a nicely done temple video based on her experience, which is, the newest endowment, basically, which has eliminated a great deal of the Freemasonry or gruesomeness, nasty stuff and things. So she had a much more positive experience than many of us have had in the older times when you were, practicing slitting your throat or pulling out your heart or all those kind of sickening Masonic things. And I have reviewed some of her things, and she talks about her story. So she's gone through some rough times when she was dealing with issues that I think were brought on by LDS teachings, actually. So check out some of my videos on Hallie Everts, commenting or, adding things that she's not aware of in LDS history, and how I think some of it's affected many people, including driving her into a bit of a tailspin at some point. She just freely kind of confesses some things that you probably don't need to, but she's open about things that are, where she's been hurt, and I think she's a good gal. She's a believing LDS girl at this point, and I don't think she always will be, because I think she's a little too smart for that, and I think her eyes are going to be open to see that they don't always tell the truth. Okay, Jedi says, Sermon Sins states, becoming a god is a doctrine of Lucifer gave, and not God. Okay. Well, first of all, this is going to be from a Christian perspective of Lucifer. And if you read Albert Pike's stuff, Luciferian doctrines, his Lucifer is not the... It's like, Christians say, Mormon Jesus is a different Jesus from Christian Jesus. Well, guess what? Masonic Lucifer, Luciferian Lucifer, mystery religion Lucifer is different from Christian Lucifer. And if you look in the Bible, if you look in the Old Testament and so forth, what do you find about Lucifer? Basically it describes, what the king of Babylon, and maybe gives a reference, or it's an allegorical, a representation of maybe Venus rising and some astrology. But it doesn't talk about this individual, really, that we see in LDS revelations, as they're called, in Doctrine and Covenants, that sort of thing, or the equivocation of Lucifer with the Jewish spirit called Satan, as is also done in the LDS Temple, which is ironic since they use Luciferian doctrines and then have Lucifer to be the same as Satan there, when in Masonry, where they get so much of the endowment, Lucifer is the good guy. So it's it's pretty convoluted. All right, Jedi Mormon replies and basically says, becoming a god is biblical. And when we say biblical, what is that? We're lumping, we're lumping Jewish, religion with Roman religion, which is what the Romans did to try to legitimize their Jesus story. But let's see what Jedi says. Actually, actually, man, Jedi's pretty cool. He thinks he is anyway. He's he's a groovy dude, but he's into Mormonism. So actually, man, becoming a god, small g, he says, is biblical. Small g means you're a lesser god. Consider this from the Bible. Hey, even the three Mormons said Jesus was a lesser god the other day, so come on. Actually, man, becoming a god, small g, is biblical. Consider this from the Bible. The Spirit itself beareth witness with our spirit that we are the children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ. If so, if it so, oh, he forgot to put an it there. If it so be that we suffer with him, that we may also be glorified together. So that's out of the epistle of Paul to the Romans. Next, he's got something from the epistle to the Corinthians, the first epistle, saying, and also, for though there be that are called gods, whether in heaven or in earth, that's interesting, what gods are there in earth? As there be gods many and lords many, but to us there is but one God. Now notice the small g versus the big G here. One God, the Father, of whom are all things. Okay, so he's saying God the Father created all things. And then it says, and we are in him. We are in him? Okay, what does that really mean? And one Lord, Jesus Christ, by whom are all things. So he just said that God the Father is like the maker of all things. And now he says that Jesus is. So is he a Trinitarian? Does he believe they're one and the same? And we are by him. All right, next he says, Lords many and gods many. Well, what is a Lord and what is a God defined as in here? Within Mormonism, we do read, in the King Follett Discourse and that sort of thing, and in section 132, the Doctrine and Covenants, that we become gods and are able to procreate and have children, spiritual children, spirit children, and we are taught that that's what God the Father did, and that Jesus Christ is just one of his spirit children, but he was the firstborn, and he's super cool. So, what are you saying here, Jedi? Okay, well, if it comes from the Apostle Paul, it must be cool, right? In the LDS endowment, we're supposedly in the premortal existence hearing these things. And does it talk about becoming gods in the endowment? Does it? Talks about people, having Adam and Eve committing sin, but basically they were set up to do so, and Lucifer just helps God and helps him out by tempting these two innocent naked people in the Garden of Eden, and he's helping them out because they could have never become gods. They could have never advanced had they not listened to him. And anyway, it's all about perspective here. One person's a Christian saying that this is not doctrinal. Well, I'll tell you what. In the Bible, the way I have read it, it says, you shall be called, you'll be given power to become the sons of God and joint heirs with Christ. So, if you're a joint heir with Christ and Christ has become a God or always was a God or is God, whatever. What it doesn't say is that you'll be able to, be married forever and procreate and that sort of a thing in the Roman Bible or the Jewish Bible. So, I don't think I'm going to comment a whole lot on that. I think that's mostly about Christians saying, this isn't biblical, so it's no good, and Jedi saying, yeah, it is. we saw what we saw. Jedi's right. It is, those things are in the Bible. They aren't taught quite the same way that they're taught within Mormonism, though, is what I would say. Jedi, you want to respond to that? All right, the church now, the now church. Dodger, regardless of how it is labeled, any group or organization that claims it is the only truth and that eternal salvation is to be found in it alone is a fraud. Well, personally, I would say that all of this eternal salvation stuff is, a fraud, because basically it's the phony product that is that is sold by those who run these religions, who, by the way, don't believe the stuff that they teach, and basically you're buying a fake product. That's what I would have to say. Any form of knowledge, such as Christianity or Freemasonry or physics for that matter, can be used to take advantage of people, or can be used to help people free themselves, says the Now Church. Using it for abusing others, I would label as satanic or evil. Agreed. Taking advantage of people, and especially when it harms them, just to benefit you or whatever, or your corporation, is pretty evil. If you want to call it Luciferian, that's cool too. Okay, here I differentiate, because according to, Luciferian teachings, or according to Albert Pike at least, who's pretty much a master, or was, of the mystery religion stuff, he says, he talks about the pure Luciferian doctrine, and which is the doctrine of enlightenment, of progressing step by step, which is the same doctrine that we are taught, that Jesus taught. I don't believe Jesus ever existed, but what do we read even in the New Testament? Though he were a son, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered. Or we learn Joseph Smith teaches these principles as well, that line upon line, precept upon precept, added upon. We get that in the Book of Abraham too. That we kept our first estate, and if we keep our second estate, we shall have glory added upon us. So it's about progression. That is a Luciferian doctrine, and I think it's a good doctrine. So equating Luciferianism with evil, the doctrines are cool, they're not evil. However, there are Luciferian or practices of, what may be considered the true Luciferian religion that we may not be aware of, which, basically these Satanists that are heads of the church, that are Freemasons, and, are involved in human sacrifice and those sorts of things. Many of those things can probably be proven, but not usually implicating or proving that it's the heads of the churches. They try to stay away from it. A lot of them get busted with their adultery, and there are people that testify that they've been sex slaves of anyone from, George Bush Sr., to Bill Clinton, to various religious leaders, of, whether they're, there are all types of, there are people that say that they're, trained as sex slaves in, George Romney's estate there in Michigan. But it's hard to prove that kind of stuff because they cover their tracks. I just would not call all of Christianity or all of Freemasonry Luciferian or evil. Peace. Okay. So I wouldn't call all the people involved. I would call most of the people really nice people, and they're at the bottom of the pyramid getting used by the guys at the top who do know what they're doing and do practice blood atonement and horrendous practices, the types of things that you would, equivocate with, the most primitive and evil religions, and in some areas of Satanism. Satanism is being popularized now, and they probably don't focus on, human sacrifice there on television programs. And they talk about doing some good things, but that's what all these religions do. They put up a nice front with their Shriners Hospital, or their Mormon Helping Hands, or their St. Jude's, and at the top of the pyramid, you got bad people doing bad things. Yes, I did that intentionally. Okay, thanks. Peter Still says, Sandra Tanner set up two columns, Freemasonry and Mormon wordings. They are almost identical word for word. Is it just a coincidence? So, those of you who don't know who Sandra Tanner is, Sandra and her husband Gerald grew up as Latter-day Saints, and they left the church when they weren't super old. I don't know, like 20 or something. You can check their stories and see. And they became Christians and have done a lot of documenting of things that they find in Mormonism to be, self-contradictory. And one of the things that they did was take a look at some of the, you know, secrets of Masonic ritual, which have been leaked by various sources, like, Captain William Morgan, for instance, who was killed by the Freemasons for doing so for the sake of the oath, which we also took, or many of us took, in some degree in the temple that were copied from Freemasonry by Joseph Smith, and then he pretended basically that he had a revelation from God or something to get this stuff, which is ridiculous. And so this person is referencing the fact that you can look at it stuff from like the degrees of fellow craft, entered apprentice, and master mason in the Masonic ritual, and see these things being practiced in the LDS temple. And a lot of it's been taken out of the temple ritual as far as the penalties go. They don't have the gruesome penalties. And from my understanding, they took those out of the Blue Lodge, I think, in 1986 in Freemasonry, and the LDS Church just followed suit 4 years later, not wanting to make it look like they're just following suit, from whatever, the Mother Lodge up there in England. So, yeah, it if you read this stuff, it's pretty obvious that it's another Joseph Smith copycat job. And the big problem that I had with this was because of a lot of study I've done regarding secret and secretive societies, and basically, what the power that they exercise over our society, and how these fellows are generally the heads of a lot of powerful corporations, governments, and religions linked together, and also have them linked together economically through stock investment, which can be revealed through the comprehensive annual financial reports of many privately owned entities known as cities, counties, pension funds, states, and countries. I don't know if we get those reports necessarily on the countries, but I've seen them on the other entities I've just mentioned, and yes, they're privately owned, and they cross invest in each other and in their other investments. Whether it be investments that you see in like a movie theater or a golf course owned by a city, or in completely separate entities such as AT&T, Boeing, Halliburton, SmithKline, Merck, Pfizer, you name it, Verizon, yeah. Um, it's watch the corporate governance videos, and you'll learn a lot. So basically, what I've seen is that Luciferianism is and magic are what Freemasonry is about its highest levels, and whoever you want to call it at the top, the Illuminati, whoever it is, you'll find these Freemasons at the head of Christian religions whose doctrines are not at all compatible with high degree Freemasonry. And you say, how can it be that these guys are the heads of Christian religion? Whether you're talking about Billy Graham, Robert Schuller, Oral Roberts, uh, whoever, or Joseph Smith, Charles Taze Russell, um, L. Ron Hubbard, and find these guys in Ordo Templi Orientis, Anton LaVey, hooked up with Anton LaVey, and Aleister Crowley as his disciples, like Hubbard was, and so forth. You find they're all mixed together. Satanism, LaVey was he's the disciple of Crowley, and he's the head of LaVeyan Satanism. Or you got L. Ron Hubbard, also a disciple through Ordo Templi Orientis of Aleister Crowley, all 33rd degree Freemasons and Satanists and heads of Christian religions, and Joseph Smith getting the holiest of Mormonism, the temple endowment, much of it from Freemasonry, instead of from an angel of God, like he gets everything else supposedly, or the Lord speaking through him, like he does throughout many revelations in the Doctrine and Covenants. He has to go to Luciferians to get it. Sure, that makes sense. Anyway, got a lot of mileage out of a few words on that one, and basically that's enough to say, hey, that there's something rotten in Denmark here. How far have we gone into this video? 51 minutes. I really wanted to get to the stuff from When Pigs Fly. Well, we're coming up there, so we're gonna get that far. All right. Kathy, New York. Hope I said that one right. I think I did. Dodger. Ah, yes. Let's Go Shopping is one of the most inspired. Okay, we're talking. She wanted to say. Let's see what Thomas Monson said as far as prophecy over his life. And I think I said, hey, was Let's Go Shopping a prophecy when he dedicated the mall, City Creek Mall? And look, it came true. The faithful heard the voice of the prophet in our shopping. Yeah, so we're talking about, investing a lot of money in the City Creek Mall, which just doesn't sound like the work of the Lord. Good points. Prophet, seers, and revelators. Where are the prophecies? Where are the revelations? Revelations are written by anonymous gospel topics, essays, writers on LDS.org, and approved by the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12. That's how we get revelation now. It's called corporate governance. The corporate directors tell us what is doctrine, and they go ahead and disavow things that Brigham Young said and that Joseph Smith wrote as scripture. They just don't mention Joseph Smith. They blame it on Brigham, throw him under the bus, and say, hey, he's just a racist, and, this was just all wrong, and as well as the last dozen prophets after him were just not in tune with God. But that's okay. They passed on their authority to us anyway. Through what? Stock investment? All right, When Pigs Fly says, you are certainly right about Pike, Albert Pike, and a Mason's choice on whether to continue to rise through the degrees of the Scottish Rite. The degrees are a form of progressive involvement, a technique practiced by many organizations, including the Mormon leadership. The basic design is to keep the low-level participants as ignorant as possible by selling hope through repetitive inculcation and never provide anything of substance. Then the leaders provide only obscure hints as to what is really going on so that the adepts can be discovered by their recognition of the true meaning of the hints. Each degree is like this. This is one reason why they worship the icon of the pyramid. It is the structure that is so very important. A candidate cannot choose to move up, but he can choose not to move up, but he can not choose to move up. That choice would necessarily be made by those in a much higher position upon a proof of loyalty. So we're talking about advancement through degrees in Freemasonry. And we're basically talking about that in the church as well.
you're called from the people at the top, but they're telling you it's the Lord Jesus. All right. Their truth is told by a proper reading of their symbols and icons. And if you listen closely, by their obscure innuendo. In order to function, every organization must maintain at the bottom a huge mass of extremely ignorant folks who finance the whole project with money, time, and labor, and are content with empty lies and false hope in exchange. Exactly. So, yeah, that's what we have in Mormonism and basically every other religion. And then you get the guys, get closer to the top middle management, and they get on the salary, whatever it's supposed to be, 120,000 a year plus, all kinds of perks and maybe an expense card and free travel, who knows what, free education for your children at BYU. The GAs, I think that's pretty well known that they get that kind of stuff. But at the bottom, we just got all the people that pay into the system, and that's pretty much what's done in Freemasonry. It's like I've said before, it's like Gordon B. Hinckley said, those that understand interest collect it, those that don't pay it. Well, it's the same way with tithing and dues in other organizations. It's like MLM. The church is like the biggest MLM ever. The reason, and I'm not saying all MLMs are bad, but they got some good products too, a lot of times. But they generally tend to be kind of overpriced, and the people at the top make the money, and the people at the bottom dream about it and drive the wealth. The reason the government does not shut down a cult like the Mormon Church is because it is a cult also. It is also a cult. Correct. The proof is that the Mormon Church is a corporation, i.e., a creature of the state, controlled by the state. That's right, 501c3 corporation. They're basically a licensed entity, which is why they have tax-free status, because they promote what they're told to promote. When we see our pictures of the Masonic brethren at the top shaking hands in using Masonic handshakes like George Bush with Thomas Monson or Gordon Hinckley with Dick Cheney, and you say, gee, I didn't know our prophets were Freemasons, and gee, some of those handshakes look pretty familiar. What were they doing? Well, you find that these guys promoted, the war in the Middle East, and they compared the people that we were mass murdering and bombing with Gadianton robbers out of the Book of Mormon. And they compared the American military to the Nephites, defending their wives and their children, their religion, their liberty, and their all. And when you look at me dissecting Gordon B. Hinckley's War and Peace talk, you can find that in the corporate video #1, and maybe in a Gordon B. Hinckley video or something too. You can see what he's done. He used some heavy-duty sales techniques, some NLP, and hypnotic language even, and hypnotic cadence. He used a lot of things to sell that, and if you really break it down, he's selling a complete lie. So he made what was evil appear to be good. And that's what they need to do. They get their tax-exempt status, that's how they roll, because you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours, and so actually the religious leaders are pawns of the privately owned entities called cities, counties, states, pension funds, and federal governments, as well as armies, navies, private police action forces, and military and regulatory agencies. And there is proof of that in those corporate governance videos. Looking at the comprehensive annual financial reports, and you can get the full thing on that. I've got a lot in those, but you can get the full thing on that on the on the Corporation Nation video. Why do I have trouble remembering the name of the guy's channel? But Corporation Nation, you can find that easy. It's like 3 hour and 13-minute video. Like the numbers. You can thank Harold B. Lee for that, says When Pigs Fly. One important way to properly read the icons and the innuendo is to become fluent in biblical references. Others are double meanings, metaphor, and the inside joke. Yeah, there's so much in this comment. He knows what he's talking about. He understands how these secret societies work. He understands the occult. He understands a lot about corporate governance, I think. And probably have to reread this a couple of times. And I'd say watch the corporate governance, because it goes along very well with what WPF is saying here. Most importantly, like the Bible teaches, by their fruits ye shall know them, by their ones at the top. If one gains the knowledge to see, this particular video becomes extremely revealing. So, I have to look at the video we were doing here, but I think it's on Scott Gordon's Masonic Apologetics regarding the LDS Temple, where he tries to make it look like Freemasons are just a men's club, and the fact that we've got some Masonry in the endowment is really insignificant. And Scott's a master at NLP and a hell of a good liar. So one must inquire, do the Masons own the government and then the church, or is it some other way around? If so, where are these extremely ignorant people being led to? Good questions. Yeah, if that sounds a little bit too conspiracy theory for you, well, first of all, just keep in mind that the word theory is used with conspiracy intentionally by those at the top to throw doubt on anything that sheds light on what these people are doing. Corporate governance shows who owns what, and yes, the government entities are actually corporations that are privately owned, and it can be proven, and how they cross-invest within themselves and in other corporate entities can be proven on the comprehensive annual financial reports so far as public corporations are concerned. What we don't tend to see is their investment in privately held corporations, such as 501c3 corporations, or in other words, the churches. Because through the investments that they gain in there, through the shares that they hold, especially those that are of the preferred shareholder shares, okay, which carry many more votes per share than do common shares or common stock, these holders of these shares are able, through these votes, to elect and control the boards of directors of these corporations, which is why we see policy that is identical so far as political correctness doctrines that are being implemented globally, and that we can see all the time on television commercials, where we see into the theme of a commercial are played certain politically correct agendas, so that they will appear normal and condition us into these things. And we see them, it doesn't matter what company, doesn't matter if it's Nationwide Insurance or Chase Manhattan Bank, or AT&T, they all do it. Why do they all preach the same doctrine that comes from, the Lucis Trust? Why? Watch that video. Read anything that flies when pigs fly. Sorry, I don't want to call you a pig. When pigs fly. When Walpurgis occurs. Read them, because there's a lot to learn. Read them and reread them. He knows what he's talking about. Alrighty. Just a couple more here, maybe. Dodger, thanks for the compliments. We don't get to see what I'm saying on here unless we go into these videos, but that's kind of more time consuming than I wanted to get. Thanks for the compliment. Besides, I'm spewing enough here. You don't need to see my comments. You can go and check them out on these videos. Dodger, thanks for the compliment. I agree 100%. There are many brainwashing control techniques used by the LDS and other groups to pressure people into accepting their BS as fact. Yeah. And sometimes I differentiate between, if you want to get technical, the difference between brainwashing and mind control is usually in common practice. That brainwashing is supposedly by someone that's adversarial in your mind, whereas a lot of mind control comes from those that we trust. I don't know how much they trust him in MK Ultra, but at any rate, it is heavily used within Mormonism, and we've got several videos on that. Learning how to recognize techniques used, whether it's just basic information control, or using other pressures to affect emotional and behavior control, and thought control. It's important to see how that's done, because there's some advanced techniques within Mormonism, and we do have NLP masters speaking to us at General Conference. When you know the techniques and you see them used, you're going, why does Jesus advocate using mind control through the brethren? All right, so the now I think the Now Church is responding to and saying to, hey, when pigs fly, you covered an awful lot of ground there, brother. It brings to mind the lodges of strict observance by Baron Hunt and other rites in Europe in the 17 and 1800s, which promised all manner of wonderful knowledge and power, but collapsed when the higher-ups failed to deliver said secrets. They were usually claiming connections to the Knights Templar. It also brings to mind Weishaupt's Illuminati, which this person thinks infiltrated Freemasonry. I think Freemasonry actually built the Illuminati, but it's not easily proven. And used it for his own ends, which included infiltrating the governments of Europe. Freemasonry at one time was a great help in financing and otherwise assisting the Protestant Reformation, since they had a common enemy in the Vatican and common roots in Templar. But it has become a corrupt organization these days. Certainly Mormonism is an example of their pyramidal model, which fools and fleeces its bottom members like a Ponzi scheme. Good insights. Yes, they all fleece the bottom members, as we just were reading there. And talking about, this is another point I like here. He talks about didn't deliver the secrets that they promised. In other words, these lures. And the LDS Church uses the same kind of thing. And that's what WPF was, kind of saying over here, too. In how you're lured, they come up higher, you'll learn more knowledge. And you get those hints. You get the leaders who will have like a smaller venue, and they will say things, make it sound like, those of us who speak, we've had our special sacred interviews with the Lord Jesus, and you're really lucky to be hearing this, because we don't tell this to many people, but this is just it's too sacred to talk about, but we'll just kind of hint about it here. Or they'll say those kind of things in the temple, especially to the youth. They're doing the baptisms for the dead. They'll say, Jesus walks these halls. The Savior walks these halls. Maybe he sneaks around at night or something, like Lorenzo Snow said. Oh, he's in the Holy of Holies in the Salt Lake Temple doing his thing and praying and whatever he's doing there. No appearance from the Lord. But when he gets out and he just bumps into Jesus, happens to be taking a walk in the dark in the Salt Lake Temple in about midnight. Yeah. So there's always that, mystical lure being put out there that, we can learn the mysteries of godhood, but it comes through strict obedience to the brethren. Then the Spirit of the Lord will reveal these subtle truths to us. Yeah. Well, same kind of lure that they use in all the mystery religions. Make you think you're going to get some grand mystery, and they reveal a little bit and a little bit, and then, figure out that you worship some guy named Lucifer. Oh, I got to do something from... Actually, I'll do one more. See what this was. It is supposedly also a coincidence that Joseph Smith and Brigham Young held and proclaimed views of black people that were popular in the 19th century America. Too bad God did not tell them it would all have to be corrected in the late 20th century. Prophets, my... beep. Oh, I'm being so good with language today. Um, yeah, uh, maybe I'd like to touch on that, actually. The whole... I'm gonna put a nice spot in the web page, in the web... on my website here, one of the chapters is going to be called, well, it's going to deal with that aspect. Temples without tans require priesthood bans, and um, what race issues are really about within Mormonism, because the the people that run society and run the LDS Church are, through whatever secret societies and secretive societies, through Freemasonry and so forth, are are they're in control of so much, and the ex-Mormon movement is controlled. It's a controlled exodus into another useful area. And the whole race card is played so very effectively to bring these people just into uh, another belief system, which works well into the one world religion. Um, and there are these people, a lot of the ex-Mormon community is falling into they're falling in step with the politically correct doctrines. And I'm not saying everything that is taught that is politically correct is 100% wrong or evil, but there is an agenda. There's an agenda to wipe out things that are used for contention in certain areas. Um, there's but there is Luciferianism, there's Satanism that is involved. In other words, pushing gay relationships is, there's a, sodomy and that sort of thing is a big part of, I think, higher degree, high level Satanism, and it's part of their practice. And I'm not saying I know, all the why about it and so forth, but the whole gay agenda is being pushed, as an acceptable lifestyle. And I'm not saying that to, on the religious side within Mormonism, we have heard people like Spencer W. Kimball say, it's blasphemy to say that God would actually make people, put a guy who likes guys in a guy's body. In other words, it's proof that God screwed up, put you in the wrong body. If you've got a girl's spirit in a boy's body, and you want to be gay, then obviously God screwed up, because that goes against the whole plan of progression within Mormonism to become, that you are a spirit daughter or a spirit son of God and that you're trying to progress. No, they preach that you just made a wicked choice, and you don't necessarily believe that everybody who's just wanted to be wicked, but those practices are part of Satanism. So there's an agenda to push that and promote it as more acceptable socially. There is also an agenda to have, mixed race marriages, basically the result of which causes that eventually you would basically have just one mixed race. In other words, like we'd all be mutts if you're talking about dogs. There wouldn't be any collies or German shepherds or Australian shepherds or Labrador retrievers. Eventually, if you just mixed everything, you just have some, mishmash, kind of like Joseph Smith's doctrines, mishmash of Luciferianism and magic and Emanuel Swedenborg spiritualism and Christianity through the Roman religion and Judaism. So and maybe a couple others I missed there. Let's not forget the spiritual wife system and his mafia style stuff, but he didn't preach that as doctrine. That's behind the scenes. That's behind his cover of the church, the counterfeiting and the whoredom in the spiritual wife system, and the Danites and the murder cult, basically. So, which is basically as satanic as you get. So, these agendas are being pushed, and both, two sides are played against each other in the Hegelian dialectic to achieve cultural norms and to achieve goals through, legislating things as well, and through NGOs. So you hear Illuminati language such as the rule of law used by anyone from Donald Trump to George H.W. Bush, and if you understand what that means and what this is about, it is creating a global government which will preach some things that sound good and sound right, but destroy individuality as the Mormon Church does, and destroy a lot of privacy. And then you basically have to trust that your leaders are good, and the guys at the top of these things are not good. I think a lot of them drink blood. So, call it conspiracy theory if you like. The more you investigate Satanism and Freemasonry and Illuminism, the more you see these things merging at the top. No wonder science is so controlled by pharmaceutical company interests. It all merges into a system. Everything promotes a system that has everybody at the bottom paying in, and guys at the top reaping the benefits. Dodger game. Here's one of the YouTube videos I have seen. Seems like the Catholic Church is 100 times larger than the LDS. Yeah, in people. And they have a lot of money. Okay, so having fun, just kind of wondering what's the Jesuit connection here with, Freemasonry and Illuminism and creation of the New World Order using religions and also investing in everything. And what I said was all roads lead to Rome. All this, the deeper you get into studying history and these things, what you find is in the Book of Mormon and so forth is that the manifest destiny doctrine preached in the United States and in the Book of Mormon and in Mormonism is basically BS. The whole sovereignty thing, America is a free nation, it's sovereign, all that stuff, that's a bunch of BS. They're just another company owned by British aristocracy, as are the banks. And it's they give us part of the truth in a spin, just like they did through the John Birch Society. And at the top, you find, people that are supposedly adversaries, Republicans versus Democrats, or Darwinists versus religious leaders posing as Christians when they're Freemasons, Luciferians. They're all one at the top, basically, because they're creating a society that serves them. And putting people against each other is very useful. It's very profitable when you're invested in the companies that make money from war, whether it's Lockheed Martin or Boeing or 3M or DuPont or Northrop Grumman or whoever it is, or in the cleanup, or the Bechtel, Kellogg Brown and Root, Halliburton. They all profit from it. The banking system. It's all ways that just leech off the people, and so do the churches. And the churches prep the people by telling them to be patriotic, that they're serving God, being faithful by following their leaders into war, and massacring people on the other side that usually didn't do what we were told they did. And so the Catholic Church, or the power behind the Catholic Church, in MSOM and whatever investments they have financially, or whatever entities are their head corporate entities, own so much. And when we find that countries are just companies, all all roads do lead to Rome, having fun. That's what I think you will find the more that you study. The entire terminology of sovereignty, as many aspects of our language has been distorted so that words do have double meanings, just like when pigs fly was saying. They have different meanings. Many words in our language have different meanings. So we think of sovereignty, we think of freedom, but that's not what it is. It basically gets down to being owned by the Holy Roman Empire, because the authority of sovereignty eventually, as you trace it, stems to Rome. So from America you go to London, and from London you go to Rome for your line of authority, essentially. In other words, if you think you're going to be a property owner in the United States, you're in fantasy land. You're not a property owner. Look at your deed. Even if you don't have a mortgage, look at your deed. You're a tenant. Learn what a tenant really is. You don't own squat. That's why they call it real estate. It's in estate. It's not outright owned. You don't own anything in an allodium. Nothing. Not even yourself. Anyway, I probably should have said too much. I don't want to depress people. But that's what this was kind of about. The mention of the Black Pope. So the Black Pope is head of MSOM, Military Sovereign Order of Malta. In other words, the Knights of Malta. It's another secret society. And pretty sure they're based in Malta and control the Vatican. In other words, the Pope's just another puppet, just like Trump is for the Zionists. Okay. When pigs fly, I'm rolling on the floor. All right. I was a little loose with my tongue. I dropped an F-bomb in that video. Oh, I'm such a hypocrite. I'm not a hypocrite. Well, I probably am, but I never said I don't ever drop an F-bomb. I tried to not do it for about 35 years. And I don't believe in being vulgar, but I see that differently. My F-bombs are just hate packages. They're all about saying, I hate you, Thomas Monson. I hate you, George Bush. I hate you, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, Ron Paul, you fake. All right. I will look forward to it. By the way, the reason I mentioned Harold B. Lee was because it was during his tenure that the complexion of the church changed to that of an unapologetic, rapacious, soul-sucking corporation. God, I always feel so illiterate. You always write so many big words and improve my vocab when pigs fly. I actually read the new incorporation papers at one time, says WPF. Prior to that time, the church operated their little ward houses as semi-independent meeting places where a community could enjoy each other's company and build strong community bonds. Now they all have the pall of death on them. Prior to the early 70s, each ward would collect money to finance their community projects and events and then submit any monetary remainder to the corporation in Salt Lake City. After the changes, bishops are all required to remit all money to the corporation, then beg for it back if they want to finance an event or a project. I'll be done just a sec. Hey, don't worry about making noise, man. It's your house. We're keeping it real here. The pall of death, because all meetings are packed into one long and boring day, and any interesting or entertaining social events have been curtailed or at least severely dampened. Talking about the 3-hour block at church for mind washing. These divide and conquer have won together, mind washing everybody, then take your children away and do it again. These money-grubbing leaders are so pernicious they even convinced everyone that packaging all their goofy meetings into one single day was for the benefit of the people. Talk about an insult and an injury to one's brain. Yeah. Well, so If you don't know, they used to have Relief Society during the week. They used to have primary during the week, and used to have a priesthood, like, I don't know, 7 o'clock in the morning or something. Then you come back for like sacrament Sunday school with the family, you know, later in the day or something. Yeah, the corporate structure and then how the money goes. Well, they also used to have, as far as the church MLM system goes, bishops and stake presidents used to get a cut of the tithing. I think bishops, I've read they got like 10% of the take from their award, and stake presidents 5%. I think I've seen somebody else contradicted that, but um, yeah, if you look at the money flow, it's pretty interesting. You can't see it anymore; they hide it, but there's some stuff, the older things, Brigham, having put up, making wineries at tithing houses, for the church, Southern Utah, planting vineyards and so they could make money for the church, selling it to like guys that are out there for whatever gold mines or whatever the heck they were. I don't know. Whatever other the Gentiles were doing, selling to them, but the church people drank so much of the wine that too many alcoholics. There's so much interesting old stuff. That's why we don't have things like the Journal Discourses on LDS.org, because you got to get rid of old speak, because when you're contradicted constantly with new speak, it becomes problematic. So it's easiest just to get rid of it, just like Spencer Kimball did with the scripture in what is it, Second Nephi, is it chapter 30, verse 6 or something like that, when it says that the Lamanites will turn white again after the Book of Mormon's revealed and stuff. Oh, they'll become white and delightsome. But unlike he was telling everybody how white everybody was getting that joined the Indian placement program, being several shades whiter than their families on the reservations, he gave up on that and just got rid of that scripture. Decided Joseph Smith must have had a malfunction on his rock, his seer stone that day, and it says pure and delightsome now. Hey, pure, white, can you see the metaphor? Sorry, it is a big deal, because they turned white in the Book of Mormon when they helped the Nephites fight the Yadians too. Okay, it's a measurable thing of seeing God's promises come true, because white is good and dark is bad. Just don't tell that to tanning salon owners. But that's what we're taught, and it's not just metaphorically, as the apologists would like to tell us. God didn't metaphorically curse them with a skin of blackness so that the Nephites could look at them and say, I'm not going to marry that Lamanite, because then I'm going to have my children learning evil Lamanite doctrines. Sorry, people, they're so full of it. And the more we have the older teachings given in the tabernacle to compare to the newer things that the board of directors gives through the anonymous gospel topics essays writers, like on the race and priesthood essay, which says a skin of blackness is not a sign of divine disfavor or a curse from God, except for the Book of Mormon clearly states that it is a curse, that it is a mark, and and that they were loathsome, made to be loathsome by the Lord God, so the Nephites wouldn't mix with them because they were evil. Yes. Sorry. So we're condemning Joseph Smith, not just Brigham Young, just like we do in the Book of Moses, when they turned the Canaanites black so that everyone could despise them after they murdered the people of Shem. So they were bad boys and bad girls, and apparently I guess their children were bad for their parents as being bad. Who knows? But it all gets extremely convoluted. It all gets filled with contradiction. The more we look at the LDS scripture and history, the more it just becomes a panorama of contradiction, a sea of sickness. A diorama of delusion. Okay. Digging it out of my hat and I'm not even wearing one. Dodger game out. Check out the website. Thanks.